Well, good morning, folks. It certainly is a cold one out there today. It started snowing again last night here in Frankfort, Kentucky, and all that snow that I showed y'all from the previous video, it hadn't even fully melted away, so it got recovered, and it's just a winter wonderland around here. But moving forward to the topic of today's video, today I'm going to be discussing a tactic or pattern for catching bass when pretty much no other pattern is working. I watched this video on YouTube from a channel that I watch quite frequently, and the name of the channel is called Fish the Moment. And the guy's name, he's been doing it for several years now, and he is like a sniper when it comes to bass fishing. He's, in my opinion, he is right there at that professional caliber. And his name is Johnny Schultz. I think I pronounced that last name correct. But check him out. This is where I got the idea for this video, Fish the Moment. And we're going to talk a little bit about my big takeaway from the video. So basically, my big takeaway from that video was, more or less, all 4 seasons out of the year, whether it be winter, spring, summer, or fall, the fish are going to be somewhat either stationary or roaming, mobile, swimming around. And so I watch a lot of YouTube. That's primarily all I watch is YouTube, and majority of the time it's about bass fishing. And watch a lot of different creators, content creators. Learned a lot from it. Obviously I still haven't been out yet on my boat. It's needs some work done to it, and I'm gonna have to put a new steering system in it. I'm gonna get that. It's just been so cold here lately. But my goal is to get some new steering cables installed in this, and I wished I would have already had it done, because we're really close to that thread fin shad die off. The last video I made, the water temperatures in most of the lakes in Kentucky were hitting around 43 degrees. And I don't know if you've seen the weather pattern for Kentucky lately, but it's 4 degrees out right now. We've got hit with a major cold front. Windshield factor is 0. And I think it's supposed to get even colder like tomorrow. So that water temperature stands a really good chance of getting down to 40 degrees, 39, whatever it's going to take to trigger the thread fin to die off. But if I was you all and was brave enough to go out and try it, I would definitely keep that in consideration. I would be keeping an eye on the water temps on these lakes just for that specific reason. But anyway, moving on. So moving on, we're going to talk a little bit more about roaming fish, roaming bass, roamers. If you're on YouTube a lot, you're going to see people putting videos. If you search it, there are already a few videos, just a few, not very many, but it's kind of a new deal. It's kind of something I think the pros have kept hush hush, because they've learned so much about bass behavior with forward facing sonar. And these pros don't want everybody knowing this. And because it's a winning tactic. And you can bet whoever kind of stumbled upon this didn't run out and just start telling everybody immediately. It's something that they figured out with time on the water. And when they seen how effective it was, obviously they probably won a few tournaments. But it's starting, the cat is pretty much starting to get out of the bag on this one. And we're going to go back in where it's warm and get on the map. We're going to get on the Lowrance mobile app and look at some lakes that I fish. And we're going to break some stuff down about what Johnny talked about in Fish the Moment and the reason why he did what he did in the video. Because initially he was catching them on a jig. And I was going to go back and watch the video for a second time, but I didn't. However, like I say, he was catching fish on a jig, and the way I took it, those fish were pretty much being stationary. You know, they could have been suspended, but I think they were on the bottom, kind of, closer to the banks, up a little bit shallower than most areas of the lake. They weren't down in the deep basins where it's 40 to 60 feet. They were on maybe like secondary points, main lake points, where tapering slopes and the edge of, like creek channels or river channels where you could find a lot of water that was in that 20 to 30 foot depth range. And the big thing that Johnny talked about in his video was rock transitions. And if you don't know what a rock transition is, basically it's gravel or rock that goes from like pea size all the way up to big chunk rock and everything in between. Boulders, baseball size, everything in between. And these spots in particular were kind of off the radar. And I'm going to show y'all what some of these spots look like. But eventually that bite kind of went cold on Johnny, and he ended up switching to a blade bait, and he started catching them. Ended up saving the day, mainly. But, that blade bait, if you're not familiar with the blade bait, I showed y'all what some of them look like. Very similar to a lipless crankbait, but different action, a little bit different action, made for colder water. But Johnny goes on to talk about how they're roaming. He said the fish are roaming. He's like, they're up, they're floating around, just kind of drifting, maybe lightly swimming, roaming. And from the way I take it, that's a pattern that can come into play at any point in time during the day. If you start out with the clear blue skies, sunny, bright, those fish, they're going to tend to go down fairly deeper, and they're going to get around structure, whether it's rocks, boulders, or brush piles or whatever. But Johnny wasn't looking for brush piles. He was looking for those rock transitions that were down in deeper water that would provide a little bit of cover for the fish to get out of that sunlight. And then once the day changed, he started seeing, overcast conditions, cloudy. It was getting darker out. And a lot of times those fish will just scatter, vanish. The bite will change, the pattern will change, and that's what happened. And he called it a roaming pattern. They were just roaming around, going nowhere, out into the abyss, just floating around, swimming. And basically he was just taking his forward-facing sonar and seeing them and making casts towards them with the blade bait. But we're going to get into what some of those areas look like on the map now. I'm going back inside because it's freezing out here. Hey guys, before we get started, if you don't care, hit that subscribe button for me. I'd appreciate it. Thanks. All right, folks, so this is the free version of the Lowrance mobile app. It's totally free. Just go to the App Store. I apologize for all the clutter on the screen, but once again, it is the free version. We're going to one of my home lakes here, close to Frankfort, Taylorsville Lake. I want to start out here, and I'm going to see if I can show you all something. These roaming fish, they're going to be in areas like this, like what I have zoomed in. You got a creek channel that goes up into this tributary called Candy Branch. Obviously, it gets way shallower up in there. And as we all know, those fish, when they're up shallow, it could be spring or summer. But in the wintertime, they tend to move out more toward areas like this, where these creek channels are intersecting and it drops off into a little bit deeper water. That's what we call the deep winter basin parts of the lake. But as you go back towards this way, you can see how that creek channel goes back in there. Those fish, when they're roaming, they could be anywhere through here. And they're not going to necessarily be down deep, neither. They could be up, toward the higher part of the water column. But generally, in the wintertime, they're going to be, little deeper, halfway down or better, 3/4 of the way. But it's areas like that that you want to look for when you're trying to find roaming bass. This area through here, it is actually really deep right above that channel that goes in there, like 20 to 30 feet deep. So just because a tributary looks shallow, don't rule it out, especially if it's got a creek channel that goes, through it, a vein like that. Because I know for a fact it's almost 30 feet deep down the middle of there in that channel. So it's areas like that that you want to look for when you're looking for those roamers. But now when Johnny first started out with that jig, he was in areas like where this flooded timber is right here, where it's about 18 to 20 feet deep. That's just one little example. These secondary points here around all this flooded timber, those fish might be holding up on one of these secondary points where it's 18 feet deep or whatever. But if they decide they want to just leave that area altogether, they could just start roaming down that break line where it drops off and just go right up the main lake. It's one of those deals where you want to put the trolling motor on high and just go. It's not just a drift, you're not just drift fishing. You've got the trolling motor on high and you're covering water. If it's sunny and those fish are stationary, here's 2 more secondary points that could definitely hold fish, and the jig would be very effective this time of year, I think, if they're just sitting on the bottom on those points. But if they move, or if the conditions change, they become mobile and no longer stationary, you're basically just going to want to run up and down this tributary with your forward-facing sonar and that blade bait, and just start casting to them when you see them. As soon as they show up on there, just start throwing at them. Now back to rock transitions. We don't want just riprap. I mean, it might be a good place to fish, but that's not a rock transition. A true rock transition, I'd really like to find an area on the lake. Alright, so I can't really find what I'm looking for at Taylorsville. So we're going to move down south to Lake Cumberland here. Here we go. So these rock transitions that were the first pattern for the morning bite, it's going to be stuff like this. You're going to want to look for areas like this. This, all around this hump. These wide spaces between these contour lines. If you don't know the difference about contour lines, we're going to talk about that real quick. So the closer the lines are together, the steeper the drop. Try to find y'all a really good example of that. So these are some pretty steep banks here where these lines are real tight together, so that water just drops off super quick. Now this is a nice area right through here. You got some good wide contour lines. Makes for a good opportunity for some rock transition. This would be a good area to look at right here where it says 18. that little wide break. It's kind of like a, it's not a, it's more flat than it is of a drop off. So, you know, the likelihood of there being transitioning rock would be really good in this area. But where the lines are tight together, not so much. Here would be another area, right, where it says no wake. You know, this whole area in here would be a good area to scan around and look for transitioning rock. If you're getting way back up in those creeks like that, ooh, I really like the way this looks. This big wide area here where the lines are far apart, right in through here. This would be a great area to just keep circling around with your side imaging or down imaging, either one, because it's plenty deep, and you're gonna see it on your screen. You know, if you don't know what transitioning rocks look like on side imaging or down imaging, just Google it. Go to Google Images and just type in transitioning rocks on side scan or side imaging or down, and it's going to pull up pictures of it. This is a really good looking area to me, where these lines are kind of spread out and it's kind of flat. Looks like a really good area to look for transitioning rocks. That might not be bad. This little area here might not be bad. A mixture of tight contour lines and spread out contour lines is kind of what you want. It's more of an indicator that there's going to be transitioning rock there. And like what we talked about, that might not be bad. I'd really like to find one that goes from like real tight lines to a wide spot and then back to, you know, like another drop off, you know. Ooh, yeah. Oh, I like this right here. Now, this is what I'm talking about. So, you got your creek channel, the river channel, whatever, that swings up by this hump here. But on both sides of the hump, you've got a lot of different, you got a lot of things going on here. There's just a lot going on here. And these wider areas are the areas you want to be looking at for that transitioning rock. It's kind of like the wide areas within the narrow areas. You want to see a lot of lines close together, but then you want to see like a few that are spread out just like this in about this depth range. They got access to deep water, they got access to shallow water. I just feel like that would be a good area to cruise around and look for those roaming fish, just because there's just so much going on right here in this area. Just to the right of that little fish symbol. But yeah, guys, I'm gonna leave y'all with that and just kind of let y'all think about that and do some research on roaming bass and try to find some more videos out there, because I do believe it's going to be a winning tactic on those days when nobody else is catching them, nobody else is getting bit. You know, it's like the conditions changed and you thought you had them patterned 1 minute and then next thing you know, everything's changed. So just kind of do some research on that, and if you do get a chance to go, just take that into consideration. You know, light penetration, in my opinion, is a very big deal, just as important as water temperature. And recognizing the changes in the conditions cloud conditions. If things start to turn overcast and it's kind of gotten a little darker out there and it was brighter out, and you were getting bit, throwing that jig, start looking for those roaming fish. Put your trolling motor on high and just start covering water in these areas, like I showed you. And if you got forward-facing sonar, even better. But more or less, just get you some moving baits, get you some blade baits, get you some lipless cranks, just baits that are, swim baits. Soft plastic swim baits would be a really good choice. Whatever, of course, the water temperature dictates a lot of that. I mean, it could be an umbrella rig for all we know. The water temperature, the colder it gets, the less that umbrella rig is going to play. And as it starts to get cooler, you got to switch from like the umbrella rig to a jerkbait, hard plastic jerkbait. Or if it continues to even get colder, your lipless crankbaits are kind of right there close to the hard plastic jerkbait in water temperature. But as it gets colder, a soft plastic paddle tail swim bait is probably the hardest to beat. But even in colder water, the old drop shot rig with some type of shad imitating lure is pretty much the go-to, I believe. And I've not had a lot of experience with it, but I've kind of studied it. And the colder that water temperature gets, obviously, the more finessey you have to become. But we're talking like low, upper 30s. When that thread fin, colder than what the thread fin, when the thread fins start to die off, even colder than that, we're talking like low to mid 30s, drop shotting in the winter, I don't think happens very often, just because it probably doesn't get cold enough here. Now, up north, definitely, but here, that jerk bait and that blade bait should work the majority of the time. And that lipless crankbait, definitely the soft plastic paddle tail. So just keep all that stuff in mind. And good luck to you. Thanks.